The beginning of the 20th century was a time of change for just about everyone. With the furtherance of industrial progress and a large portion of the world being engulfed and ravaged by the atrocities of World War I, change was bound to happen on a large scale. The way people worked, accomplished tasks, spent money, dressed, learned, thought, expressed themselves, and lived all changed drastically. The art world especially took a huge turn for change, away from the realism, romanticism, expressionism, and impressionism of the previous century. Many artists were deeply impacted by the effects of the war and the changing times, and this in turn resulted in a return to traditions from the classical past for some, as well as the creation of many new art forms and movements for others. Artists were simply doing whatever they personally felt would help them cope with the difficulties of the changing times, and for some, their coping mechanism came in the way of the dreamlike art movement called Surrealism. Surrealism was an art movement that was centered around the unconscious areas of the mind, drawing upon what is within in order to create art. The unconscious part of the mind includes anything from fears, to dreams, to memories, to desires you're unaware of. This unconscious mind focus for Surrealists was partially inspired by what was going on in psychology at the time in which the movement gained traction. Sigmund Freud and his unconventional methods and theories probably had the most impact on Surrealists, as many of them chose to showcase things relating back to his work with human sexuality and childhood. Other Surrealists limited their art to the most basic elements and worked completely out of autonomy and reliance on their minds, to a point where the subjects and imagery in their art would be either quite childlike or not recognizable forms at all. Though Surrealism had a creator and a manifesto of set guidelines, Surrealism was for the most part a multifaceted movement, and many different approaches could be considered Surrealism, so long as the core purpose of the focus on the unconscious mind was present. There were many important figures to the success of the Surrealist movement, but it all started with one man, André Breton. Breton was the creator of the Surrealist Manifesto, and thus the creator of the entire official Surrealist movement. Rather than an artist, Breton was actually a writer, born and based in France, whom focused on anti-fascist and anti-establishment writings as well as poetry. Because of this, writing is actually where the Surrealist movement started off. However, Surrealism eventually branched out into politics, music, performance, and other methods of expression. The Surrealist movement really stuck hard with visual artists and grew to be well known with artists such as René Magritte, Man Ray, Max Ernst, and Juan Miró being early participants. Regardless of Surrealism's original creator or prominent participants, one man essentially became the poster child for Surrealism and made it as well known as it is today: Salvador Dali. Salvador Dali was born in 1904 in Spain and had quite the strange life starting at an early age. When he was born, his parents believed he was the reincarnation of his brother who had passed away before him, and thus they treated Dali as a gift, giving him whatever he wanted, yet reminded him daily of their strange belief. Though this had some damaging psychological impact on Dali, it essentially enabled him to become a great artist. He was encouraged to do as he pleased, and therefore he chose to be a painter at a young age, when daydreaming was more important than schooling to him. With tremendous support from his parents, Dali attended art school, got expelled for claiming no one was skilled enough to critique or examine him, and ended up traveling around the Western world to follow his chosen path. Because of his circumstances, education, and self-confidence, Dali became a very skilled painter and carried his classically trained realistic style with him into the Surrealist art movement later in life. Although Salvador Dali experimented with quite a few different art movements throughout his career, some of his most famous and striking works came out at the time after he joined in on the Surrealist movement. Dali truly was a perfect candidate for the Surrealist movement, as he was quite outwardly eccentric, confident, as well as self-focused. He knew who he was, and he was quite in tune with his inner self, embracing it on the outside in a variety of ways. Of course, one of those ways was through his art and unique artistic technique. During his Surrealist era, Dali created a technique for accessing the unconscious mind which he called the paranoid critical method. Dali used the paranoid critical method to form ideas for his artwork through inspiration from his dreams and other forms of unconscious thoughts and fears. From this, he essentially would form a plane of existence for his artwork in which reality is blended with the dream world. Dali took this and embodied this hybrid world in everything he did, from how he made himself look, to TV and event appearances, to how he lived. Everything in his life was unique and inspired by his inner unconscious mind, and thus he truly became Surrealism embodied in a person. Throughout his many years as an active artist, Dali made many artworks in many different forms. He of course made paintings, but also delved into compositions for photography, illustration, sculpture, jewelry making, home decor design, authorship, animation, and even film. Branching out into so many fields grew Dali's fame exponentially. Thus he became the main person most people thought of when they thought of the Surrealist art movement. In fact, he was so popular, Disney even decided to create an animated film with him. As the Surrealist movement upon creation was quite anti-establishment, Dali's fame struck a nerve amongst other people in the official community of Surrealists. They began getting sick of him being at a prominent spot to the public eye for the group. As Dali was quite proudly egotistical and blunt about his successes, these issues led to many disagreements as well as instability amongst those in the group. The final straw came when Dali was allegedly found to be supportive of a fascist leader in Spain that the Surrealists were expressly against, and Dali was officially ousted from the group because of it. Thankfully, this didn't impact how Dali already chose to live his life, and he just continued on being his Surrealist self and producing mesmerizing works of art. The most famous and exemplary piece of Surrealist art that Dali created was done so in 1931, entitled The Persistence of Memory. This piece includes symbolism that is personally significant to Dali from his childhood memories, traumas, and the fears from his inner unconscious mind. An example of symbolism from his childhood are the rock formations Dali chose to include in the background of the piece. These particular rocks are from a place in Spain that he spent a lot of time around as a child and that he stated would frequently reoccur in his dreams. An example of symbolism from his trauma is the strange flesh creature in the middle of the scene, a physical representation of how he felt being treated like he was his dead brother's reincarnation constantly by his family. Considering the figure is quite a strange one, not found in the natural world, it most likely came from his exercises involving conjuring up things from his unconscious mind with his paranoid critical method. Finally, an example of symbolism that represents Dali's fears is that of the ants on one of the melting clocks. Melting clocks represented the fluidity and change of time, while the ants represented decay for Dali, and thus the imagery of them together shows a sort of awareness of the decay or passing of time. Symbols of decay in Dali's artwork also reference his long-standing fear of STDs, representing the avoidance of sex that he chose for the majority of his life and the psychological battles he'd have with his own desires versus his own fears. All of this symbolic imagery and personal meaning is very indicative of the unconscious mind and psychological autonomy behind Surrealism. Therefore, this piece exemplifies the movement extremely well. All in all, Salvador Dali was a great contributor to the Surrealist movement, whom still is a source of fascination and adoration for people today, decades after he has moved on from this world. Dali's artwork and methods embody what the Surrealist movement was all about: autonomy, personal significance, and the unconscious mind. With his fascinating yet mysteriously personal artworks, films, books, and lifestyle to match, it's no wonder he was as famed as he was. Salvador Dali was and will forever remain a fabulous icon to both the Surrealist movement and the modern art world as a whole.